The deed was no thicker than a prayer card, folded twice and sweat-stained from the press of his hand. Elias Boone carried it the way a man carries something fragile, as if the thin slip of paper might crumble if he let it breathe too much of the dry prairie wind. 25 cents, 2 bits and a laugh from the clerk at the courthouse, was all it had cost him to own what others called a shack, a ruin, a place left to rot where cottonwoods swallowed the fence lines and crows hung like shadows in the branches. He walked the 2 miles out from town with his hat pulled low, shoulders bent forward as though he could duck beneath the words that clung to him like burrs. Men at the saloon had not bothered to lower their voices when they mocked him. Boone, the fool who bought a coffin of splinters. Boone, too coward to gamble, too weak to fight, so he buries himself in rotten boards. He had heard it all. He let it settle without reply, though each word cut deeper than they knew. The truth was he had been someone once, ranch hand with promise, a man with calluses that carried worth. Then came betrayal, swift and quiet, and it left him hollow. The cabin revealed itself in pieces as he walked, first the leaning chimney, then the roof sagging inward, then the full shape crouched among weeds taller than a man's waist. It looked less like a home than a body fallen and left unburied. Still, Elias stood there a long while, hat in hand, the weight of silence pressing down. Dust curled around his boots, and in that dry hush he felt both mocked and strangely claimed by it. He pushed open the door. Hinges screamed. The smell met him first, of rot and dust and the long exhale of wood abandoned to weather. The air was thick, as though every sorrow ever felt in the room still lingered. Sunlight fell through gaps in the roof, slicing beams through motes of dust. A broken chair lay on its side. A table sagged with one leg snapped. Cobwebs draped from rafter to rafter like forgotten bunting from a funeral long past. He set his few belongings by the hearth, a bedroll, a tin cup, a Bible no longer read but carried from habit. He crouched, brushed his hand across the hearthstone, and felt cold as iron. He imagined flames had not touched it in years. With slow care he stacked dry twigs and coaxed a flame to life. Smoke struggled upward, curling against the chimney before finding release. He sat back on his heels and watched, listening to the whisper of fire as if it were the first friendly voice he had heard in months. Night fell early beneath the cottonwoods. Coyotes sang in the distance, their cries splitting the quiet, but Elias felt no fear of them. Loneliness was a harsher predator. He chewed bread gone hard, sipped tepid water, and lay back on the floorboards, staring at a roof where stars winked through the cracks. His body stilled but his mind moved restlessly. The words of townsfolk played again, that cabin don't want livin' in it. Best leave its door shut. He had laughed it off when he signed the deed. Now, lying with his head against the splintered floor, he could not ignore the strange draft that lifted against his cheek, cold and steady from below. By morning he worked to make the ruin into shelter. He hauled branches, patched holes, swept dust into corners. His muscles remembered labor, they sang with ache that felt almost welcome. With each small repair he whispered something half like defiance, half like prayer, I am not finished yet. And yet, beneath all this, the unease remained. That draft at night, steady as breath. 2 days later, when he shifted the table, he noticed the rug beneath, curled and discolored. Pulling it aside, his eyes caught on edges that did not belong to natural floorboards. A square cut into the wood, faint seams filled with dust. A trapdoor. His hand hovered, hesitating. The townsfolk had spoken of it, though never directly, always in half jest, half whisper. No one had dared open it. Some claimed it was cursed. Some said a woman had died down there. Others claimed it led to tunnels carved by men who disappeared. Elias stared at it a long while, every tail brushing against his skin like cold fingers. He knelt, pried his fingers beneath the edge, and pulled. Hinges groaned with reluctance, then gave. A black mouth yawned open. Cold air rose, sharper now, carrying the faint scent of earth long shut away. Elias leaned close, lantern trembling in his hand, and the draft kissed his face as though something down there breathed. For a long time he did nothing but stare. Dust motes drifted into the darkness and vanished. The fire at the hearth popped once, startled. His throat tightened. He was a man used to silence, yet this silence pressed heavier, as if waiting. He lowered the lantern until its glow touched rough-cut steps leading into shadow. His pulse thudded. He thought of the jeers in town, of men calling him half-dead already. He thought of his own shame, the long hollow nights. Perhaps in that cellar lay nothing. Perhaps only rot. Perhaps something worse. The lantern shook in his grip. He set it down carefully, unwilling yet to descend. His breath sounded loud. He closed the trapdoor gently, almost reverently, and set the rug back across it. For now, that was enough. That night he dreamed of voices he could not understand, whispering from beneath the floor. When he woke, sweat clung to him, and the fire was cold. He fed it, and the flames licked back to life. His eyes strayed again to the rug. By the fourth day he could no longer ignore it. Work felt useless, food tasteless, time stretched taut by that square of wood beneath his feet. Every creak of the floor carried a question. Every sigh of wind through cracks seemed like something calling. He pushed the table aside again. The rug curled back. His hands, calloused and strong, trembled like those of an old man. He set the lantern beside the opening, flame steady. He stared downward into a throat of darkness, stairs falling into nothing. His jaw tightened. He whispered, not to the silence but to himself, "If this is where I'm meant to fall, then let me fall." He placed one boot on the first step. The wood groaned under his weight, long and used. The air grew colder. He lowered himself, one step, then another, lantern lifted before him. Shadows leapt across stone walls, raw and damp, carved by hands long vanished. The cellar stretched out small but deep, lined with shelves that leaned under the weight of dust. His lantern trembled over shapes, a child's rocking horse, broken at the leg, bundles of letters tied with a ribbon that had long lost its color, and in the far corner, a chest sealed with rusting iron. Elias froze. His breath clouded in the cold air. The chest seemed to pulse in the lantern light, not alive but weighted, heavy with years and secrets. Every instinct screamed to leave it shut. Yet the cabin's silence pressed him forward. He crouched, placed his hand upon the lid. The iron felt colder than water in winter. He pulled once, locked. The sound of the lock echoed against the stone like a shot. Elias sat back on his heels, lantern low, and felt his heart pound. The cellar seemed to breathe around him, each shadow shifting like something that watched. He lifted the lantern higher. On the wall, carved deep into stone, were words half faded, "Remember me kindly." Elias shivered. The letters seemed cut by desperate hands, gouged into rock as though to outlast even death. He stared until the lantern's flame guttered, until he could not tell if the words belonged to some woman's final plea or his own longing whispered back at him. The chest sat waiting. The words glowed faintly in shadow. Elias Boone, who had been mocked and forgotten, now sat between two silences, the silence of the town above, and the silence breathing from this cellar. He touched the chest once more, then pulled back. His throat closed. He blew out the lantern. Darkness swallowed him whole. The cabin above was waiting, but the secret remained below. And though he climbed the steps back into the thin light of dawn, though he shut the trapdoor once more, he knew the cabin would never again let him rest until he opened what no one else dared. Dawn spread pale over the cottonwoods, gray light seeping between leaves as though the world itself hesitated to wake. Elias Boone had not slept. He sat at the hearth with the Bible on his knee, unopened, its cracked leather heavy as stone. The trapdoor beneath the rug seemed to hum with each passing hour, a presence more solid than timber or stone. He could feel it even now, in the low creak of the cabin's bones, in the faint chill that never lifted no matter how fiercely the fire burned. He told himself he would not go down again. Once was enough. He had seen the rocking horse, the bundles of letters, the iron chest breathing dust, and the words carved into stone that clawed at his mind, "Remember me kindly." He had seen enough to know silence was best. But silence had a way of growing teeth. By noon, he found himself staring at the rug as though it had eyes, waiting for him to blink first. When he finally pushed the table aside, the motion felt less like choice than surrender. His hands shook as he gripped the iron ring and lifted. The hinges shrieked. Cold air struck his face, sour with earth and old grief. Lantern in hand, he descended again, boots echoing against the stone steps until the cabin above became only a shadow. The chest waited where he had left it, square in the lantern's glow, the lock rusted but firm. Elias crouched, ran his fingers over the seam. It seemed less a box than a confession sealed in wood and iron. He pressed his ear against it, foolish as a child listening for a heartbeat, and almost swore he heard one. He pulled at the lock. It refused him. He searched the shelves, found tools abandoned long before, a bent nail, a hammerhead without a handle, rust that crumbled beneath his touch. He worked with patience, sweat stinging his eyes, until at last the lock gave with a crack that echoed like a gunshot. The lid creaked open, heavy with resistance, and the lantern flame jumped as if startled. Inside lay not gold nor weapons nor bones, but fragments of a life, folded linen yellowed with age, a revolver wrapped in cloth, and beneath them, a leather-bound diary. Elias lifted it with reverence, dust blooming in the air. His hand lingered on the cover as though it might burn him. Then he opened it. The handwriting inside was careful, looping, the kind of script taught in schools back east. Clara Mayfield, the first page read. The name settled into him with strange weight, as though he had always known it but forgotten until now. He read by lantern light, the fire upstairs forgotten. The diary told of a young woman who had come west as a mail-order bride, filled with fragile hope. She had written of loneliness, of a husband who drank and raged, of nights spent listening to coyotes while fear crawled her skin. Each entry bled more sorrow than the last, until the words themselves seemed to tremble. The final pages grew frantic, words pressed deep into paper. He leaves me for days. I hear voices at night. If anyone finds this, remember me kindly. Elias closed the diary with a shudder. The cellar seemed to close in around him, shadows tightening. He carried the book up into the cabin as though it were a child. He sat by the fire, the diary on his lap, and read until his eyes blurred. For days he read, each night deeper into Clara's words. Her voice filled the silence. Her fears became his own, her loneliness echoing his. He found himself speaking to her aloud, foolishly, as though she might answer, I know the way of hunger, Clara. I know the ache of being left behind. The cabin no longer felt empty. It felt haunted, but not by malice. Haunted by a voice that wanted only to be heard. The town did not fail to notice the change. Men muttered when Elias came for supplies. Boone's gone soft in the head, they said. Talks to ghosts now. Jed Crowley, broad-shouldered and cruel-eyed, spat at Elias's boots one morning. That cabin'll rot you same as it rotted her. Some curses don't lift, Boone. Elias met his gaze without flinching. Maybe the cursed ones are the men who forget, he said, voice low, steady. For the first time since his ruin, he did not bow beneath another man's words. He walked out, leaving the room in silence. But gossip grew. By the week's end, it reached fever. Crowley and his circle gathered one night with torches and kerosene, riding out to the cottonwoods. Elias woke to their jeers outside, the crackle of flame catching the dry weeds. He stumbled from the cabin, diary pressed against his chest. Best let it burn, Boone. Crowley shouted. Firelight danced across his face. That place is poison. Ain't fit for livin'. Elias stood at the threshold, shadows of fire clawing behind him. He held the diary aloft, voice ringing into the night. This cabin held more love than any of your houses. She asked only to be remembered. And I will. The men faltered. Flames licked higher, but Elias did not move. He stood framed in fire, steady as stone, eyes hard with something Crowley had never seen in him, dignity. Silence spread, broken only by the hiss of kerosene. Crowley cursed, spat into the dirt, and threw down his torch. One by one the others followed, unwilling to face the weight in Elias's voice. When the last hoofbeat faded, Elias turned back. He smothered the flames with earth, hands raw, lungs filled with smoke, until only embers glowed. The cabin stood blackened but unbroken. Inside, the diary lay safe on the table. He sat beside it, trembling, his chest rising with something that felt like victory and grief mingled. Days turned to weeks. He rebuilt what was damaged, sanding scorched wood, patching holes, setting his hands to the labor of resurrection. Each night, when work left him aching, he read again from Clara's words. Sometimes he carved small things, a cross above the door, her initials along the mantel. Sometimes he whispered prayers he no longer believed, not for himself but for her. The town watched from afar. Gossip shifted. Where once they called him fool, now they muttered of a man unbending, a man who stared down fire and walked unashamed. Some avoided him. Some nodded quiet respect. But Elias did not care. He had found a purpose the world could not take. Winter approached. The wind grew sharper, nights long. Elias sat one evening by the fire, diary open on his lap, when he noticed a slip of paper tucked deep within the back cover. His fingers trembled as he drew it out. It was a letter, sealed in wax, the edges brittle. He held it to the light and read words written in Clara's desperate hand, "To whoever finds this, I leave not gold nor land, but truth. My husband meant to bury me here. If I vanish, know that I did not run. I loved this cabin. Let it remember me kindly." Elias closed his eyes, the words pressing into him like a brand. The cellar, the chest, the carved plea, it was no mere relic. It was testimony, buried to be forgotten. But he would not forget. That night he carved her name into the doorframe. Clara Mayfield. The knife bit slow, the letters deep, each stroke an act of defiance against time and cruelty. When he was done, he ran his hand across the grooves and whispered, "You are remembered." The wind rose outside, rattling the shutters. Elias sat back, weary, the fire casting long shadows. He thought of Crowley, of the townsfolk, of the voices that had mocked him. He thought of Clara's words, her loneliness so like his own. And for the first time in years, he felt something shift inside him, small but steady. Not joy. Not peace. Something fiercer. A dignity that no man could strip away. The cabin stood quiet, but no longer empty. In its timbers, in its shadows, in the carved letters above the door, a story lived. Elias Boone, once forgotten, had become keeper of a memory greater than his own.